and so if you're staying for the class, then feel free to have a seat. All right, well, we'll get underway and want to welcome everyone here as we continue our study of the book of Genesis. We will be primarily in Genesis 44 and 45 today. We're continuing with the story around Joseph and his brothers, and we'll see how things continue here. So that's chapters 44 and 45. We were off last week, and because of the fact that the missions team from Mexico is reporting next week, we will not have our regular class next Sunday because that time is being used by our missions team to report, and so the next class in Genesis will be in 2 weeks. And then I think after that we'll have a string of uninterrupted classes at that point. And when the missions team asks to report, of course, we want to make sure they have the opportunity, and this is the ideal location and time for them to do it. So that'll be next week. So just be aware of that. And so we're continuing in Genesis here, and you'll recall that 2 weeks ago, in chapters 42 and 43, we've seen that Joseph was putting his brothers to the test. Joseph is now, of course, second in command over Egypt, and this is, of course, as a result of him interpreting the Pharaoh's dreams to him and correctly interpreting that there'd be 7 years of plenty and then 7 years of famine. And Joseph had, of course, given the advice to Pharaoh that we need to make sure that we stock up and save over the 7 years of plenty. And Pharaoh put Joseph in charge of that. And it's a good thing he did, because those 7 years of famine aren't affecting just Egypt, they're affecting all the surrounding nations. And so Egypt is the only place that has stored up food. And as a result, people from surrounding nations are coming to Egypt to buy grain, to buy food. And that's, of course, why Joseph's brothers had come. And it was only 10 of the brothers that came because Jacob didn't want to risk sending the youngest one, Benjamin, because that's the son of his favorite wife, and his youngest son. And so we see that the brothers went once, Simeon got put in prison, whole situation there, brothers go back, and then they have no choice but to go back to Egypt again because they need to get more food, and they need to pick up Simeon along the way, but that clearly wasn't their main concern. And so there we go. So we had left off at the end of chapter 43 where Joseph is with his brothers. His brothers don't know who he is yet, and they've just had a feast together. This second visit has gone much better than the first visit. They've had a feast together. Benjamin's portion has been 5 times as much as any of the others, and it leads off at the end of verse 43, where it says, they drank and were merry with him. So let's read the first couple verses in chapter 44. Then he, that's Joseph, then he commanded the steward of his house, fill the men's sacks with food, as much as they can carry, and put each man's money in the mouth of his sack, and put my cup, the silver cup, in the mouth of the sack of the youngest, with his money for the grain. And he did as Joseph told him. So we see a repeat of what Joseph did the first time, where, as you'll recall, Joseph's brothers, they all brought money to pay for the grain. They're not there to steal, they're there to pay. But Joseph had arranged for the money to be secretly put back in their sacks when they returned with their grain. And of course, this had really concerned them. And so Joseph arranges for the same thing, that give them the food, and then give them their money back and put it in the sack and make sure they don't see you do it. But there's a twist here. He says, put my cup, the silver cup, in the mouth of the sack of the youngest, with his money for the grain. In verse 2, the repetition of this word cup and its qualification is the silver cup suggests its importance and its precious value. Now, the Hebrew term that's used for cup here is gabia, and it also is used elsewhere in the Old Testament. In fact, in Exodus 25:31, it's the word that's translated as it's the golden bowl of the lampstand that goes in the tabernacle. So this is not just any ordinary cup. This is the silver cup, my cup, Joseph's cup. And Joseph is obviously setting up a test here. And Joseph's steward does as he is commanded. Going on to verse 3. As soon as the morning was light, the men were sent away with their donkeys. They had gone only a short distance from the city. Now Joseph said to his steward, "Up, follow after the men, and when you overtake them, say to them, 'Why have you repaid evil for good? Is not this from this that my Lord drinks, and by this that he practices divination? You have done evil in doing this.'" So, what's going on here? Well, Joseph has given his steward some directions, and so obviously the steward, does whatever he's told to do. So first he's supposed to put the money back in the sacks, and then he puts the cup in Benjamin's sack along with the money. And then Joseph is saying, okay, now you're going to follow after them, and here's your script. Here's what you're going to say. And so that's what the steward is told to do. Now, what is this whole, again, nowadays we sort of look at this and we go like, okay, so what's the significance of a cup? I mean, we all have cups in our houses. Some might have china, where you got fancier cups and all that, but we normally don't make a big deal about a particular cup. Well, it's important to realize that in ancient Egypt, the practice of using drinking cups for libation, which is the word meaning ritual pouring to the gods, was common in ancient Egypt. So it was part of the worship of the gods. You'd have this special cup. You'd fill it with whatever drink you're putting in, and you sort of, and in fact, the priest would fill the cup with spiced beer often, and then pour out its content as a libation, as a sacrifice to the gods. And then what they would do is they'd examine the sediment, like the remains behind, left it in the bottom of the cup, and that was then deciphered as a message from the gods. So you'd have this spiced beer in it. You pour it out as this ritual. You'd have sort of sediment that would be at the bottom, and you'd sort of try to interpret the, whatever you get from looking at sediment at the bottom of a cup. That sounds weird to us. It should sound weird. That's a terrible way of trying to figure out what God wants you to do. But that was how they practiced at the time. So this just gives you a bit of context about how seriously Egyptians would take, something like this cup. Now, there is a phrase here that I know will catch some people's attention. It's verse 5, where it says, "Is it not from this that my Lord," he's referring to Joseph, "drinks, and by this that he practices divination?" Raises the obvious question, is Joseph practicing divination? Like divination, that's where you're like trying to, you're communicating with the gods. Often you're communicating with the dead. You're trying to, you're using sort of these, almost magical tricks to determine what God wants, what God wants you to do. This seems to go against what we see about Joseph. Joseph doesn't seem like the type that would be doing this sort of thing. Now, there's some different ways we can interpret this. The one explanation, and probably the simplest one, is that this is all part of the ruse. Joseph doesn't actually practice divination and worship these false gods. This is part of the script he gives to the steward, so that way this is believable. Why have you stolen this cup? I mean, it's the special cup that my Lord uses, and he practices divination from it. And that doesn't necessarily mean that Joseph practices divination. It's also possible that maybe he only appeared to practice divination. But again, we don't know for sure, but I wouldn't lose too much sleep over this one, because it's obvious, because the text tells us that Joseph is giving a script. He's playing a role. He's testing his brothers. He's trying to find something out about them. Now we go on to verse 6. "When he overtook them, he spoke to them these words. They said to him, 'Why does my Lord speak such words as these? Far be it from your servants to do such a thing. Behold, the money that we found in the mouths of our sacks we brought back to you from the land of Canaan. How then could we steal silver or gold from your Lord's house? Whichever of your servants is found with it shall die, and we also will be my Lord's servants.' He said, 'Let it be as you say. He who is found with it shall be my servant, and the rest of you shall be innocent.' And then each man quickly lowered his sack to the ground, and each man opened his sack, and he searched, beginning with the eldest and ending with the youngest. And the cup was found in Benjamin's sack. Then they tore their clothes And every man loaded his donkey, and they returned to the city. So you just put yourself in the mind of these brothers. They've had, this is their second visit to Egypt. This one has gone better than the first one. Things are going well. They've got their, the Benjamin is returning safely with them. Their dad's going to be happy. They've got the grain. And then Joseph's servant overtakes them and accuses them of stealing the cup, the silver cup, like the most important cup that Joseph uses. And you know what their response is? Their response is like, we didn't do this. We're innocent. We're innocent. And this is not the first time where we see, and I call it excessive honesty. Like, it is actually kind of impressive, these guys, about the degree to which they fall over themselves proclaiming their innocence, because they actually are innocent. This is how people who are really innocent tend to act, where you're just like, yeah, I didn't do it, and in fact, you go ahead and search me. I'll take a lie detector, like whatever. Here's all. Here, I'll empty my pockets. Like, you can see their response here. Like, why do you speak such words to us? Far be it. Like they say, like, look, remember with that money that was in our sacks the first time, we brought back double that time. Like we didn't take this. And like, there's no way we could have done this. And then, so if any of us have it, that person dies, and the rest of us will be your servant. And by the way, that's just a fancy way of saying we'll be your slaves. Like, they're confident. Like, we have not done this. And why are they confident? Because they didn't do it. And so that's what, these innocent men say. And then you'll notice how Joseph's steward responds, saying, let it be as you say, but it's actually not as they say. He who is found with it shall be my servant. The rest of you shall be innocent. Like, the steward is like, okay, you guys are going way too far here. I only just want, whoever took it, that person's going to be my slave. The rest of you are free to go. And then the steward arranges for each sack to be searched, and they start with the oldest and go to the youngest, and I'm pretty sure that's part of the instructions too. What a great way to build up suspense in the situation, because these brothers are so confident in their innocence, that they say, like, we'll become slaves. And the suspense is building as they go from oldest to youngest. And with each sack being empty, their confidence is going to grow. See, nothing there. See, nothing there. That sigh of relief. And then you get to the last one, Benjamin's. And it says, then they tore their clothes. Why are they tearing their clothes? Well, in the ancient Near East, that's a sign of grief. Someone you love dies, you tear your clothes. And they are not happy. And you'll notice that they all go back. The 10 of them could probably, based on what the steward had said, the 10 of them could have just said, yeah, sucks to be you, Benjamin, like, we're gone. They all actually went back. And so they are obviously in complete shock. Going on to verse 14. When Judah and his brothers came to Joseph's house, he was still there. They fell before him to the ground. Joseph said to them, what deed is this that you have done? Do you not know that a man like me can indeed practice divination? And Judah said, what shall we say to my Lord? What shall we speak? Or how can we clear ourselves? God has found out the guilt of your servants. Behold, we are my Lord's servants, both we and he also in whose hand the cup has been found. But he said, far be it from me that I should do so. Only the man in whose hand the cup was found shall be my servant. But as for you, go up in peace to your father. Now it's interesting, in verse 14, only one brother is mentioned by name, and that's Judah. Why is Judah being mentioned by name? Why not Reuben, who's the oldest? I mean, Judah is only fourth in priority. I mean, we know it's not going to be Simeon. Simeon is not terribly great. Judah seems to have assumed a leadership role by this point. We saw that in the last chapter, where it was Judah who managed to convince his father Jacob, look, we need to take Benjamin. I will be his surety. I will be there. and you can hold me accountable. And so Judah's clearly taking the leadership role. I suspect that Reuben is kind of off to the side at this point, and Judah's taking the leadership role. And so then now Joseph confronts them, and you'll notice he says, did you not know that I can practice divination? Now, again, my theory here is I don't think that Joseph actually does practice divination. I think this is all part of the ruse. It's all part of the script to make it look like he's got divine knowledge. And to be honest, both whether you're a police officer interrogating a suspect or a social worker investigating potential abuse, or frankly a teacher or a principal, trying to find out who did something at school, it's not that uncommon that you kind of imply you know more than what you actually do. I've done that more than a couple times where we're trying to find out who did the vandalism in the bathroom, and I sort of, call the student into my office, and I'll sometimes start with a line of, just so you know, the cameras don't lie. And half the time I don't have any footage of it, because the cameras aren't as good as people think they are, and they just aren't. But it's amazing how you can sort of get confessions when you just sort of start that way, or you just kind of, I just called them into my office, and then I'm like, so do you know why I've called you here? Because half the time, they'll admit it right then and there, where it's just sort of, and I'll just sort of say, let's just assume that I know. It'll go better if you just, so whatever. Whatever kind of, and Joseph is doing the same kind of thing here. He's like, do you not know a man? He's putting them off on edge here. He's saying, I know. I can practice divination. And so I know that you stole my cup. Now, of course, Joseph knows that they didn't, but he's testing them. And so Judah, again, speaks up. He's taking the leadership role. He's saying, what shall we say to my Lord? What shall we speak? How can you clear ourselves? God has found out the guilt of your servants. Now, that's an interesting thing to say, because they're actually totally innocent. They really didn't steal the cup. They really didn't steal the money. They are hyper honest. So why did Judah say this? I suspect that he might be referencing what they did to Joseph many years ago, because they do have guilt, very serious guilt. They they were going to kill their brother, and they sold their brother into slavery. That God has found out the guilt of your servants. Because we know that earlier, when they were talking amongst themselves, they were referencing Joseph and what they did there. And so I don't think Judah is confessing that they stole the cup. I think he's making reference to the fact that, that if you know, then I guess you know everything. And then he's like, we're all going to be your slaves. We're all your servants. And then Joseph is like, no way, not far be it from me I should do so. Only the man in whose hand the cup was found should be my servant. That's a very reasonable, sensible offer. It actually makes a lot of sense. Where you just, you know what? I don't think all 11 of you were involved in stealing the cup. I just think it was the guy in whose sack it was. And because you guys are obviously so honest, it's just this one guy here. Just this one youngest brother. He'll stay and be my slave, and the rest of you are free to go. That's the ultimate test. What are they going to do? Because if they are jealous still of Benjamin, because of how Jacob favored both him and Joseph, this is the perfect opportunity for them to that seems fair, okay, no problem, and we'll say our goodbyes to Benjamin, and off we go. Because, remember, they had no problem selling Joseph into slavery many years ago, where they arranged it. Now they're basically being offered that all you have to do is give the word, and Benjamin just stays here as a slave. So now we see how they respond, going on to verse 18. Then Judah went up to him and said, O my Lord, please let your servant speak a word in my Lord's ears, and let not your anger burn against your servant, for you are like Pharaoh himself. My Lord asked his servant, saying, have you a father or a brother? And we said to my Lord, we have a father, an old man, and a young brother, the child of his old age. His brother is dead, and he alone is left of his mother's children, and his father loves him. Then you said to your servants, bring him down to me, that I may set my eyes on him. We said to my Lord, the boy cannot leave his father, for if he should leave his father should die. Then you said to your servants, unless your youngest brother comes down with you, you shall not see my face again. And when we went back to your servant, my father, we told him the words of my Lord. And when our father said, 'Go again, buy us a little food,' we said, 'We cannot go down. If our youngest brother goes with us, then we will go down. For we cannot see the man's face unless our youngest brother is with us.' Then your servant, my father, said to us, 'You know that my wife bore me 2 sons. One left me, and I said, surely he has been torn to pieces, and I have never seen him since. If you take this one also from me, and harm happens to him, you will bring my gray hairs in evil to Sheol.'" So what is Judah doing here? Well, he's retelling the story. He's doing a remarkably good job of it too. He is accurately relaying, like again, hyper honesty here. This is impressive, where he is saying like, here's the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. This is like, just please listen to me patiently. Like, remember, you had asked us, do you have a brother? And we answered honestly, and we explained the whole situation. Maybe we didn't mention how the other brother died, but whatever, we told you everything else. And then you said, we have to bring the brother, and we had to explain to our father why we have to bring him, and we did. And like, this is, but if we don't bring Benjamin back, he's going to go to the grave. He's going to die in mourning. That's what verse 29 is saying, where Jacob will go to Sheol, to the place of the dead, in mourning. So he kind of retells the story, sets the context, and now you see Judah kind of fully intervene, starting in verse 30. "Now therefore, as soon as I come to your servant my father, and the boy is not with us, then as his life is bound up in the boy's life, as soon as he sees that the boy is not with us, he will die. And your servants will bring down the gray hairs of your servant our father with sorrow to Sheol. For your servant became a pledge of safety for the boy to my father, saying, 'If I do not bring him back to you, then I shall bear the blame before my father all my life. Now therefore, please let your servant remain instead of the boy as a servant to my Lord, and let the boy go back with his brothers. For how can I go back to my father if the boy is not with me? I fear to see the evil that would find my father.'" This is the key moment here, and I think Judah goes farther than Joseph had possibly anticipated. Joseph likely was expecting that his brothers would proclaim their innocence, and he was also probably expecting that they'd try to negotiate to let Benjamin to go back with him. But Judah goes farther than any of that. After reminding Joseph that, look, our father, he's going to die. He's going to die with grief if we come back and we don't have Benjamin with us. And then he says to Joseph, "Your servant, I am a pledge of safety." And remember, that's exactly how he had pitched it to Jacob. He said, "I will be a pledge. I will bring him back." And then he says to Joseph, the key verse in verse 33, "Please let your servant remain instead of the boy as a servant to my Lord, and let the boy go back with his brothers." What is Judah doing here? He's offering himself in Benjamin's place. He's willing to sacrifice himself that he would bear the penalty for what Benjamin allegedly did. You really do see a full transformation of Judah's character at this point. This is considerably better than what we read about in Genesis 33. He's obviously changed, where he is willing to sacrifice himself, and he's willing to be a slave in Egypt for the rest of his life, so that way Benjamin can go free, even though Judah has not, in the context of this story, has not done anything wrong. And so that is what he pledges. And I think this is a huge part of the reason why we see later that Judah is the one through whom the messianic line is going to continue. And and here is where you do see the parallels, because you will often see types or parallels in the Old Testament that kind of give a foreshadowing of what Jesus does for us. What Judah is doing here, this is a foreshadowing of the type of sacrifice that Christ does for us. I'll pause there for a moment. Comments or questions? Yeah.
And the love and the passion and the desire that
Yep.
And that same desire from God to be able to be with us, to have a relationship with us, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, like what Sam is saying for those, and also repeating it partly for the recording, is that with the foreshadowing, as a component of this, you have Jacob, sort of symbolizing God the Father, who loves his son, and that Judah, is willing to intervene. And so, yes, there is a lot of parallelism here. And in his commentary, the Genesis record, Henry Morris, this is where Henry Morris really kind of emphasizes the point that Joseph, he's impressive. Is impressive in a lot of ways, but sometimes we read the story of Joseph and we kind of put all the emphasis on Joseph and we miss what Judah's doing here. And that it's Judah who's actually the son that the Messianic line will continue, not Joseph. Joseph is impressive. It's very impressive. Judah's the one here who's offering to sacrifice himself. And I will just add that, the narrative here is telling us what happened. It does not tell us whether Joseph handled this perfectly or not. We don't know. It's our natural tendency, we read this, because in our brains, and especially when we're reading our kids' Bible story books and all that, we tend to have good guys and bad guys. It's just our natural reading. Joseph's a good guy. And so we naturally tend to read this in the most favorable light that, Joseph he's doing exactly the right thing here. He's testing his brothers and all that. But we actually don't know that for sure, whether he handled this perfectly or not. One could argue that Joseph is kind of maybe going a little bit to the extreme here. He probably could have found some of this out without having to sort of put his father through another year of agony and, his brothers through all of this here. So I don't know. So just keeping that in mind as well. But no matter what, there's no question here that what Judah is doing here, this is an impressive offer. And it does show that he is willing to sacrifice himself for his brother, and a very, very different Judah than what we see a few chapters earlier. Other comments or questions?
One quick one.
Yeah.
In regards to Joseph being second in command of the country, why didn't he ever take the time to go travel back to his family in Canaan and make things right with his brother during that time when they were prosperous?
Yeah, it's a good question. And the question that Art asks is, if Joseph is at second in command of Egypt, why not sort of take the opportunity during those 7 years of plenty to go make contact with his father and go? And that's a good question. I suspect that it might have had something to do with the fact that he's really, really busy being second in command. And he's second in command, not first in command. I suspect the Pharaoh would have wanted him to devote his full attention. Got to keep in mind that travel was a much bigger deal back then than it is now. This isn't the case of that, okay, you just get on a flight and then as long as you don't have a drug cartel cause a problem, you can usually get back fairly easily. But normally, it's fairly easy nowadays. But back then, we're talking about months, and I don't think the Pharaoh would have been happy with Joseph being gone for months. So I suspect that it would have been fairly early on at this point in his role. But it's a good question. Actually, I've never thought of that one before. So, see, we all sometimes think of stuff that we've never thought of before. But I think it's just he would have been pretty busy during those 7 years of plenty and probably didn't have time to get away, would be my guess. Yes, go ahead.
Just further to that, like at the end when his father does die and Joseph has to go ask for permission to go bury him, I wonder if he's still very restricted.
Yep.
In his ability to actually be free outside of Egypt.
Yeah, it's a good point, that because later on we do see that when Joseph taking his father back to Egypt, back to Canaan to be buried, he has to ask the Pharaoh for permission, and just raising the point that he is second in command, but he is second in command, and so he doesn't have complete unfettered freedom, and he does have to. He's doing everything under the authority of the Pharaoh. So yes. Other comments or questions? Okay, well then we will carry on then into chapter 45. Then Joseph could not control himself before all those who stood by him. He cried, "Make everyone go out from me." So no one stayed with him when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. And he wept aloud so that the Egyptians heard it. And the household of Pharaoh heard it. And Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" But his brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed at his presence. So this is where I'm pretty confident in saying that Judah went way farther with his offer than Joseph was anticipating. Because up to this point, Joseph has been a model of, yep, he's handled it. He knows kind of where to put the test. He kind of knows when to step back. He knows, but it says here, he could not control himself. He's overwhelmed with emotion at Judah's offer to give himself in place of Benjamin. It's such a transformation in Judah, and frankly, a change in the brothers in general from what, because remember, the last time Joseph had seen them prior to the encounters in Egypt was when he was being sold into slavery. I suspect Judah wasn't quite so nice at the time when they were selling him to slavery. So this is such a change, such a transformation. And so it's time for the dramatic reveal. And so he sends everyone away except his brothers, and it says that he wept aloud so that the Egyptians heard it and the household of Pharaoh heard it. So this wasn't sort of a quiet sobbing. This is, everyone would have been wondering what's going on, which I'll reference that when we get to the next section, because I think that Pharaoh might have been a little worried initially about like what's going on with my second in command here, because we kind of need this guy to be stable and steady and all that, and what's he doing, like having this breakdown all of a sudden. And in verse 3, it says, Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph." Now, in Hebrew, it literally is just, "I, Joseph." He introduces himself to his brothers with the shortest phrase he possibly can. There is no long prelude there. It's just, "I, Joseph," and just blurting it out. And he says, like, "Is my father still alive?" Why would he ask that when he's just had like the big speech from Judah about like, my father's going to die if you don't let Benjamin go back, and like Joseph is like, "Is my father still alive?" You know what I think is happening here? He's overwhelmed by emotion. Like that's just a natural thing to ask. I want to see my father. Is he still alive? So he blurts out in the shortest, simplest way, "I'm Joseph. Is my father still alive?" And the brothers, it says they could not answer him, for they were dismayed at his presence. Yeah, I'm not surprised that this has caught them off guard. Remember, they have no idea this is Joseph. I realize that, that some people might be sort of going, how can they not at least have some kind of inkling, like, come on. Like, yeah, it's been a while since they've seen him, but like he's their brother, and so why would they not have clued in? But you got to remember, it's many, many years that have passed. They're not expecting to see him. They think he's dead, and so they're not expecting that. He's speaking a different language initially. So throughout this whole thing, up to this point, they've been having a translator, so they don't even know he can speak Hebrew. And he's second in command of Egypt. Who expects your brother you sold into slavery to then be second in command of the country you go to go buy food? That's just like the probability of that is pretty low. And so they couldn't answer. They're dismayed at his presence. And of course, you can imagine all the stuff that's going through their heads where they're going, "Oh boy, we're in trouble now." And you assume the worst. Because remember, Joseph he's been gruff throughout this whole time here. He put Simeon in jail for a whole year. Like, Joseph is showing, I'm ready to do this. So they think that this is it for us. Like, that we're done. Like, we've got nothing here. So let's go to verse 4. So Joseph said to his brothers, "Come near to me, please." And they came near. And he said, "I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. And now, do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. For the famine has been in the land these 2 years, and there are yet 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvest. And God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth, and to keep alive for you many survivors. So it was not you who sent me here, but God. He has made me a father to Pharaoh, and lord of all his house, and ruler over all the land of Egypt. Hurry and go up to my father and say to him, 'Thus says your son Joseph, God has made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me, do not tarry. You shall dwell in the land of Goshen, and you shall be near me, you and your children and your children's children, and your flocks, your herds, and all that you have. There I will provide for you, for there are yet 5 years of famine to come, so that you and your household and all that you have do not come to poverty. And now your eyes see, and the eyes of my brother Benjamin see, that it is my mouth that speaks to you. You must tell my father of all you have seen. Hurry and bring my father down here. Then he fell upon his brother Benjamin's neck and wept. And Benjamin wept upon his neck. And he kissed all his brothers and wept upon them. After that, his brothers talked with him. And so you can see after they've gotten their initial shock and Joseph has managed to bring his emotions at least somewhat under control, he then gives them a more complete explanation. Because before, it's like, I, Joseph, is my father still alive? Now it's like, I am your brother Joseph. I wasn't kidding before. I am actually Joseph, and if you're wondering which Joseph it is, it's the one you sold into slavery, the same one. So that's, and then he reassures them. He says, don't be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. That is a very gracious thing for him to say. And Joseph says that, where he says that God sent me before you to preserve life. And Joseph then proceeds with this perfect analysis of the situation, where he's like, we're 2 years into a 7-year famine, and God sent me before you to preserve a remnant on earth. Like, this is part of God's plan. It was not you who sent me here, but God. Now, does that fully sink in with the brothers? No, because we'll find out when we get to chapter 50 that they still hadn't figured it out yet. So he's going to have to repeat it to them in chapter 50. But he says it very clearly here. This is part of God's plan. God had arranged, and he used you to send me here. And now when you sort of think about this, this is a classic example of how God's will for our lives is typically easiest to understand when we look in hindsight. So I'm willing to bet that when Joseph was initially on the caravan to Egypt, I don't think he was singing a lot of hymns of praise, going, this is part of God's plan, I'm totally good. Maybe he was, I don't think so. I don't think he was singing God's praise, that he was, just super content when he was in Potiphar's household and then got thrown into prison. Maybe he handled it really well. I mean, we know he handled it as well as reasonably could, but I don't think he saw the bigger picture, but he sees it now. Like, now he's sort of like looking back, going, that's right. I wouldn't be in this position now if they hadn't done this, and then I wouldn't be helping, and we would all be starving right now. God arranged this. And it's a good reminder to all of us that when we're going through difficult things, that it's usually in the midst of those things that we have the hardest time seeing what God's actually doing. But then with benefit of hindsight, then you're sort of, if this hard thing hadn't happened, I wouldn't have met this person. Or if this thing hadn't happened. I'll give you one example of my personal life. This is fairly minor as far as a lot of hard things, but it was a big deal to me at the time. When I was finishing up when I was in grade 11, I got informed that my dad was being promoted and being transferred to Yorkton, Saskatchewan for my grade 12 year. I was not pleased. I was extremely unhappy. Like, I can't tell you how unhappy I was. And I did everything I could to make sure that my parents knew how miserable I was. And I regret that now, because I was pretty upset. I don't want to leave Steinbach. I don't like this. Not happy about it. So I had to spend my grade 12 year in Yorkton, and I was so upset about it that I actually arranged to transfer my credits back, and I still graduated here in Steinbach. But you know what? I look back now, if I hadn't gone to Yorkton that 1 year, I wouldn't have gotten involved in Saskatchewan Youth Parliament, and I wouldn't have met my wife, Angela. And there's a whole bunch of friends that I have now that I made then and that I wouldn't have connected to. And my life would be a lot more limited now if I hadn't had that 1 year of complete misery. So a minor thing, but a big deal at that time. 17-year-old, it's a big deal having to move to another province, another school for your grade 12 year. I was not pleased. I look back now and I go, that's really good. I didn't have that perspective then. I was ticked. So anyway, I'm sure we can all sort of look back on things that we go through, and that we now realize that, okay, there was a broader plan, and that things do work out. So Joseph here gives them this perspective. Again, we know it doesn't sink in fully because later on this comes up again. But he's he says to them, hurry and go to my father, and basically, you got to get back to Canaan, and you're going to go tell Jacob what has happened, and you're going to come back here. We're not doing this long-distance relationship thing where you're going to come get grained once a year. You're going to come get the best of Egypt. In verse 10, he says, you're going to dwell in the land of Goshen. Now, what is the exact location of Goshen? The scholars it's disputed among scholars about exactly where it was. It's probably a region in the eastern delta area of the Nile, which would be suitable for herdsmen, which is sort of the lifestyle of Jacob's family. And Joseph probably chose this region because of its suitability for herdsmen and because it's in relatively close proximity to him. That location also had the benefit of it lessened the likelihood of Jacob's family just being fully absorbed into Egyptian society, because that would also have been part of the concern about are they just going to get completely absorbed? Spoiler alert, they don't. If you read Exodus chapter 1 and you find out, they're not getting absorbed into Egyptian society. So we know that quite clearly. But it's a region in Egypt where they can live and they'll be taken care of. And so he tells his brothers, you need to go tell my father. Tell him everything. Tell him about my honor in Egypt and all that you have seen. And then it says he fell upon his brother Benjamin's neck and wept, and Benjamin wept upon his, and he kissed his brothers and wept upon them. So this is an emotional reunion. Now they're able to have and then the last part of verse 15, after that his brothers talked with them. Okay, now we can talk. Now we can have a conversation. And that would have been quite the discussion, because you have to sort of deal with all of this stuff first in terms of, and before you could just have your regular conversation. Okay, going on to verse 16. When the report was heard in Pharaoh's house, Joseph's brothers have come. It pleased Pharaoh and his servants. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, say to your brothers, do this, load your beasts, and go back to the land of Canaan, and take your father and your households, and come back to me. And I will give you the best of the land of Egypt, and you shall eat the fat of the land. And you, Joseph, are commanded to say, do this, take wagons from the land of Egypt for your little ones and for your wives, and bring your father and come. Have no concern for your goods, for the best of all the land of Egypt is yours. So where it says, Pharaoh, it's reported to Pharaoh, Joseph's brothers have come. And it says it pleased Pharaoh and his servants. Why did it please Pharaoh? Well, at initial glance, it's because Pharaoh, likes Joseph, he's his second in command, and that's probably part of it. But I think there's another reason why it pleased Pharaoh. Remember, we read in verse 2 of chapter 45, where it says, Joseph wept aloud, so the Egyptians heard it, and the household of Pharaoh heard it. Pharaoh might have been a little worried about when he heard all this, really loud weeping and all that, and the whole household hears this. Pharaoh's probably a little bit sort of what's wrong with Joseph? This is not good. What's going on? Because I kind of need this guy. He's really running things. So when he's told that Joseph's brothers are here, oh, okay, well, this isn't so bad then. So Pharaoh is pleased, and he's very gracious toward Joseph, where he says, tell your brothers, absolutely, they're going to get to stay here. I'm going to give you the best of the land of Egypt. You eat of the fat of the land. And then notice verse 19, you, Joseph, are commanded to say. It's a command. You got to take wagons from the land of Egypt for your little ones and your wives, and bring your father and come. I command you to treat your family really well. Probably a command that Joseph was quite happy to follow. Have no concern for your goods, for the best of all the land of Egypt is yours. This is a really positive development. And again, none of this would have happened if Joseph's brothers hadn't sold them to slavery. Did that mean that it was right for them to do that? No, it was really bad. Again, we'll talk about that more when we get to chapter 50, because there's an interesting discussion about the future and predestination and all that. It's actually, that verse in chapter 50 is one of the most hotly disputed verses as far as what does it mean about predestination and free will. So we'll have fun when we get into that one. But just in terms of the situation here, this is really positive. This is really good. Don't forget all the hardship that Joseph went through, and the brothers to a certain degree, to get to this point. Going on to verse 21. The sons of Israel did so, and Joseph gave them wagons according to the command of Pharaoh, and gave them provisions for the journey. To each and all of them he gave a change of clothes. But to Benjamin he gave 300 shekels of silver and 5 changes of clothes. To his father he sent as follows: 10 donkeys loaded with the good things of Egypt, and 10 female donkeys loaded with grain, bread, and provision for his father on the journey. Then he sent his brothers away, and as they departed, he said to them, "Do not quarrel on the way." So Joseph here is, he's commanded by Pharaoh to give them wagons with all these supplies, and Joseph is following the command. And he gives them all a change of clothes. That's nice. Benjamin gets a little extra, 300 shekels of silver. A shekel's like 2/5 of an ounce or 11 grams. That's a lot of silver. Benjamin's being well taken care of. And 5 changes of clothes. Is this possibly even another bit of a test where it's like, are you really going to show that you're not jealous of your youngest brother? I sort of wonder that. And of course, he sends supplies to his father to take care of him. And then he sends the brothers away, and as they depart, he says, "Do not quarrel along the way." Now, there's a couple of ways you can interpret this thing about do not quarrel on the way. Some commentators suggest that it's a serious command, where he's thinking back to how his brothers had been in the past, and he knows of their tendency to be jealous, and he's saying, don't quarrel, and don't be raising an issue over the fact that Benjamin got more stuff. After all, Benjamin didn't exactly sell me into slavery. It was you guys. But I actually lean more towards that there's a bit of humor here. I do not quarrel on the way. Seriously, I think it's actually kind of a funny thing to say, where you've gone through all of this, and you're telling him you're going to live in Egypt. It's going to be this great situation. Jacob is obviously going to be very pleased to find out Joseph is still alive. And then, as they're leaving, he says, "Don't quarrel along the way." I mean, as if that this is going to be the major issue. So I think it's a touch of humor here when he says, "Do not quarrel on the way." But in any case, going on to verse 25, and then in a little bit we'll be open up to some comments and questions. So they went up out of Egypt and came to the land of Canaan to their father Jacob. And they told him, "Joseph is still alive, and he is ruler over all the land of Egypt." And his heart became numb, for he did not believe them. But when they told him all the words of Joseph, which he had said to them, and when he saw the wagons that Joseph had sent to carry him, the spirit of their father Jacob revived. And Israel said, "It is enough. Joseph, my son, is still alive. I will go and see him before I die." So this would have been quite the reunion when the brothers, come to Jacob and they say, "Joseph is still alive and he's ruler over all the land of Egypt." Okay, the fact he's still alive is that's a big thing, because remember, they are the ones who had provided that coat of many colors with the blood on it, and remember the animal blood, and they're like, "Hey, Dad, do you recognize whose coat this is?" "Oh, it's Joseph's." "Oh, that's too bad." Now it's, Joseph is still alive, and he's ruler over all of Egypt. And it says, Jacob's heart became numb, he did not believe them. Yeah, I probably would be skeptical as well. I mean, this is not what you expect. Now, what the text doesn't tell us, and what I certainly am curious about, is I'm pretty sure that in this conversation, there might have been a question along the lines of, how in the world did Joseph end up getting to Egypt? And what's with I thought you brought me his coat and it had all the blood on it. They obviously would have had to tell their father what they did. I'm curious how that went. It doesn't tell us here. I suspect that despite the good news they were laying, that was probably a difficult part of the conversation. Maybe they had Benjamin tell the story. I don't know. But in any case, they informed Jacob of this, and it's obvious that what Jacob is focusing on is not what his brothers did, because the text tells us that the spirit of their father Jacob revived. They see the wagons. He sees the wagons and all that. He's like, well, they can't be making this up. They're coming back with way more stuff than they had money for. So where would they be getting all this stuff from? So I guess they must be telling me the truth. And if all 11 of them are saying this, including Benjamin, who has no reason to lie, then this must be true. And in the last verse here, where it said, Israel said, "It is enough. Joseph, my son, is still alive. I will go and see him before I die." Yeah, it is very good news. Jacob's had a hard life. And we actually, in 2 weeks, when we look at how Jacob has the reunion with Joseph, it is an emotional one. And incidentally, Jacob actually lives, I believe it's another, was it 17 years? He lives a fair bit of time after, when he goes back to Egypt. He does not die right away, even though he keeps presenting himself, he's just ready to die at any moment. He actually has some good years ahead of him, which is good. Okay, so just before I open it up to comments and questions, I'll mention just a couple quick points of application, things that would stand out. First of all, we need to remember that people are able to change. Judah is a prime example because, let's be honest, like after our study of chapter 38 and what Judah does there with Tamar and that whole situation, which is like, it's really, really bad. Our natural tendency to sort of go, okay, we'll just write this guy off. He's bad. And bad guy, hopefully he gets punished, and we move on. And Judah ends up being the leader among the brothers. Judah ends up being the one to offer his life as a sacrifice for Benjamin. Judah's the one who's going to be the ancestor of the Messiah. If Judah can change, Judah, this is pretty bad. And again, I don't think any of us have done what Judah did. So, like, that's pretty bad. And he changed. So we need to remember not to write people off. Second, God can use difficult events to bring about good. I mean, it's clearly conveyed to us. Joseph explains it perfectly here, that all the hardships that Joseph went through, what his brothers did to him, and even that time that Joseph spent in prison, God used it every step along the way to bring about something really good in the end, and it's only obvious in the end. It's not obvious during the steps. And it's a good reminder to us when we're going through difficult things. So let me open it up. We got a few minutes for comments and questions.
In verse 8, it says something where Joseph says he was made a father to Pharaoh.
Yeah, good question. So the question is like in verse 8, where Joseph says, he's made me a father to Pharaoh. Yeah, a number of commentaries actually kind of point to, it's an odd phrase, because he's not obviously Pharaoh's father. He's not head over Pharaoh. Most scholars tend to sort of say it's kind of a figure of speech of, like, he's put me in charge of taking care of things. Like, it's sort of, I'm like a father to Pharaoh where, like, I'm sort of looking out for him. I'm looking out for his interests. Like, I'm there by his side. Yeah, that's kind of, but yeah, it's a peculiar phrase, and yeah, exactly. So yeah, it is interesting where it's Joseph's position here is really unique. It's where he is not just second in command, like he is. Pharaoh's basically kind of comes across like Pharaoh's basically said, like, Joseph, you're really good at running stuff, so you run stuff, and I'll just stamp stuff whenever I need to stamp things, and you're basically doing everything. That's the kind of right-hand person you want. So, yeah. Yes, Ruth.
If the land of Goshen was the best of the land, why weren't the Egyptians living there? And why was it unoccupied?
Yeah, I don't know if it was totally unoccupied, but the lifestyle of, like, because the Israelites were like herdsmen, like they were working with sheep and such, and that was a lifestyle that was the Egyptians did not care for, and so the type of activity that Jacob's family was engaged in was not something that the Egyptians were into, and so land of Goshen was ideal for their lifestyle, and perhaps not quite so ideal for kind of, I guess, the standard crops that they focused on in Egypt would be my guess. So it's and for all we know, it's also maybe they cleared out Goshen for Jacob and his family. I don't know, but I suspect because of the fact that, in fact, we see that in which I think it was in chapter 43 when Joseph and his brothers were eating. Joseph had to sit away from them because he couldn't. Because if he'd eaten with them, he would have given away his cover. Because the Egyptians don't eat with Jews, and the reason had to do with the fact that they work with the sheep or something like that. I'm trying to remember exactly which verse that was. So, but yeah, let me just, they lift it up. Oh, here we go. Yeah, the verse 32, of chapter 43, that the Egyptians could not eat with the Hebrews, so that is an abomination to the Egyptians. Again, most commentators say the reason it's an abomination is because they work with sheep and all that. So, yeah, good question. Yes.
Just another thought as to the gift of the land of Goshen could not be because, like during the time of the famine, I mean, Pharaoh was buying land rights in exchange for provisions. I mean, he had no land to give, right?
Yep. Yeah, and in fact, as time goes on here, in fact, we'll see that in the next, when we get to, 2 weeks from now, when we're in chapter 46 and 47, Pharaoh was, that's a nice way of putting it, buying up land and acquiring land rights. The more direct way of putting it is that the Egyptians were they were desperate, and they basically said to Pharaoh, we'll do anything. You have all our land, just let us have some food. And Joseph is actually pretty good negotiator. You will see that in chapter 47. So yes, the leaders, like Pharaoh and Joseph, had plenty of leverage, to put it simply, as far as to be able to transfer land and all of that. They were, private property rights were limited, to put it bluntly. So, other comments or questions?
Find it interesting for how willing the brothers were to give up their lives or be servants or slaves
Yep.
to Pharaoh. Would that have been a common negotiate to surviving, or would that have been a change in their personality specifically of the brothers?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of both. So the question is, why would the brothers have been willing to sort of give themselves, to be slaves in order to save Benjamin? Is this a change in character, or is it sort of a common sort of where you sell yourself into slavery in order to save someone, or even to save yourself? It's a bit of both, because in that time, in fact, you see that later on when you get to the law that Moses gives. If you are in debt and you can't pay your debts, one of your options was you sell yourself into slavery, and sometimes for a defined period of time, or it could be your entire life. And so being sold into slavery, or selling or giving yourself in slavery, was something that did happen. The bankruptcy option wasn't available at that time. There was no sort of, you know what, my numbered corporation can't pay for this, so no problem, I'll let the corporation go bankrupt and I'll just start up a new business. That's not how that worked. You're going into slavery if you've got a problem. But I also do think it's a change in character for the brothers, particularly for Judah. There's no question his character has changed. It is very obvious. And it looks like the character of the brothers has changed to a certain degree as well. But I don't know, and again, we'll have some interesting discussion when we get to chapter 49, where Jacob is blessing his sons, and he's sort of talking about the future, and the future is connected with their character. Jacob doesn't give a glowing description to all his sons here. I kind of think that Simeon and Levi, for example, kind of basically continued on being a little too violent. And again, without giving away too much here, Benjamin actually doesn't get a spectacular description in Jacob's thing in chapter 49 either. So I don't want to go, the text doesn't tell us explicitly that all brothers changed in terms of their character completely. It gives us a pretty clear portrait of how Judah has changed. And obviously it tells us enough about the other brothers that they clearly regret what they did in terms of selling Joseph into slavery. But I don't know how full of a transformation in character it was for all of them. I could go either way on some of that. Other comments or questions?
In relation
Yep.
to the telling them not to quarrel along
Yes.
the way, in my commentary in my Bible, it says potentially that would be even that, okay, now we actually have to tell our dad what we did.
Mm-hmm.
So they're on the whole journey home, what does that look like?
Yeah, that's a good observation. And because yes, it's a long journey home, and they have plenty of time to talk. And after getting over the initial shock and then euphoria of, oh, Joseph's alive and we're going to get to come back and this is going to be great, they had lots of time to talk on the way back going, okay, how are we actually going to do this? Like how, and yeah, there's plenty of opportunity to quarrel about stuff, about who gets to tell dad about the slavery thing. Why does Benjamin have 5 changes of clothes? Like, he didn't actually do anything. Like, he's just kind of this. There's lots of opportunities to quarrel. So yes, I think it's possible there's a serious element. It's also possible, and it could be both too, where there's a serious thing, but it's also kind of it would be kind of dumb after all of this to now have the whole thing break down because you got into a fight on the way back. Like, that would be kind of dumb. So Joseph's just kind of like, hey, don't mess it up now, you guys. Like, we've gotten this far. Like, this would be a bad time for everything to fall apart and you not to make it back because you got into a big fight on the way back and you sold someone else into slavery. So, yeah. Okay, we're out of time because we're at 12. Oh, we're past 12, so I'll quickly close with prayer. And then reminder, next week we don't have our regular class because the Mexico team is reporting, but our class will continue. Genesis isn't going anywhere, so we'll be back in 2 weeks. Heavenly Father, Lord, I just thank you that we can read your word. And Lord, there's so much here that we can dive into and reflect on. And we see just how through Joseph's life you worked your will, even at times where it would have been very hard for him to see where things were going. And Lord, I just ask that you would help us as we go through difficult times. Help us to see that you worked your will through our lives as well, even if we can't see it right away. I just ask that you'd be with everyone here and help us as we share our faith with others. I ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.